Hi and welcome to Grit and Greatness. I'm very excited to introduce today's guest, Mark Tluszcz, Chairman of web development platform Wix, the first investor in Skype, and co-founder and CEO of Mangrove Capital Partners, not to mention self-made billionaire. Now, if you thought Dragon's Den or Shark Tank was brutal, Mark only invests in about 5 out of 2,000 ideas that he sees come through his doors every year. Now, Mark knows how to pick a good idea and invest in a great company. In fact, he turned an $8 million investment in Wix into a $15 billion company as at July 2020. And that was up $5 billion from when we first recorded this interview back in May 2020. Wix remains the largest tech IPO or initial public offering to come out of Israel. And as a first investor in Skype, when it was acquired by eBay in 2005, Mark was named one of the most respected technology deal makers globally. So not only does he know how to grow a billion-dollar baby, he knows what to look for in a founder, a product, and a company. He knows a thing or two about grit, and importantly, the billion-dollar question. How do you take a company from good to great? Mark, thank you so much for joining us here today.
Well, thank you very much for having me. I'm excited.
Mark, as the chairman of Wix, who's just announced a market cap of 10 billion, so congratulations on that. Also one of the first investors in Skype and the founder of Mangrove Capital. You're obviously someone that makes very good business decisions and you know how to pick a good company. And of course, when you're making those investment decisions, there's a couple of factors that you need to take into consideration, such as the idea itself, as well as the founder and the person that you're actually investing in. And then, of course, some sort of business strategy to bring it all together. What, in your opinion and your experience, actually makes a good investment decision for you?
Well, there's a lot of serendipity in it, first of all, right? In that a lot of things have to come together for it to be the perfect opportunity. And what we've seen over time, and at the beginning, what you see is obviously great people, good ideas, but really the biggest thing that we first look at is what is the vision and the dream and the goal that these founders are trying to achieve, right? It has to be really big. One of the opportunities that you get with the internet is that you have an opportunity to build a global business in a very short period. So ambition, I would say, is kind of one of the first things that we look for. After that, we dig into many, many different things. The quality of the individual, the business ethics, his or her co-founders. But the reality is first, does this opportunity have enough ambition to satisfy what we want, right? And yes, thank you for mentioning that at Wix, we've just symbolically reached $10 billion as a market cap. It is an important symbol because we now have 3,200 employees and everybody looks to that as a symbol. It says we've arrived somewhere and hopefully it also says we have ambition to go further. So ambition stays consistent through everything that we do.
Yeah, and I guess it is so important to any type of business is to be able to always come back to that why and what's the actual overall vision of a person and obviously the business itself. So that makes a lot of sense. And I guess when you're looking at making an investment decision as well, there can be a lot of hype, particularly in the startup world and particularly in the tech world as well. And with that, you've obviously got your own personal interest there and there's a lot of excitement and what you can see as potential opportunities. So how do you manage your own bias there? And how do you act on a lot of your own intuition in making those type of decisions?
Yeah, I mean, bias is an important part here because the reality is as we age or as we move and we get into different contexts and the reality is that you need to be careful of those biases. And so our team is a team of 10 people, all very different. And what we try to do is make sure that we're understanding the points of view that others are expressing, but making sure at the same time that they are not expressing biases because of something. So if you happen to be, like my case, 50 years old, the reality is you need to be careful that you're not judging 25-year-old ideas in a way with my lens, right? Because my lens for a 25-year-old is totally irrelevant. So what we do is we fall back onto what we've done historically well, which is it ambitious enough? Do the founders have grit? Are they hungry? Are they fighters? What makes them special? And then do we think this thing can get traction in many, many, many countries? So biases quickly disappear, although they always come back. So our job is to beat them out of each other within our firm and make sure that what we really worry about is the individuals that are starting these companies and the greatness of them and the greatness of the idea and the ability to really go ahead and build a global business.
In your opinion, what does the DNA of a successful entrepreneur look like?
Well, we think, at least, and we don't have all the answers, right? But we certainly think that a successful entrepreneur is somebody who says, I'm going to start a business. I want to build it great. And I understand, this is important. I understand that this is a full-on 7-day-a-week, 365-day job, right? And in fact, the word job is not even that. It's a passion. So we have to see all of that. We have to be sure that these founders understand. If you want a steady job, go somewhere else. Don't come and ask investors like us for money. And don't say you're going to go build this global business in a very short period of time. So the first criterion is how committed are they to win, right? Now, we have a lot of failure as investors, but you got to start with the basis that you are determined that you're going to do everything. There will be no excuses, right, to win. And that is something that we spend a lot of time trying to understand with founders is, do they have that in them? And that's difficult because as we build these companies, it takes 5-10 years to build companies. And we all change in that time frame. So the hardest thing is keeping that as a constant throughout our relationship with the founders. So, at Wix, I've been a shareholder in that company for 12 years. And every single year, I go and I look at the founders and the CEO and say, do they still have it to take it to the next level? And, that's a responsibility as a founder, as an entrepreneur you have if you want to build a global business, right?
Absolutely. And what does the word grit mean to you?
Well, since I was a child, I somehow, I don't know, I think it's innate in people, right? For me, winning was so important. And grit and winning, I know they're not the same, but as a child, you equate it the same, right? What does it take to win? Well, it takes focus and it takes believing in only that. So when I think of these things, I think of anything I do full on, 1,000%, right? Because I never want any excuses. I don't want to have to say, well, I wish I'd spent more time or I wish I had done this. And if you look around, whether it's in business or in sports, all the great successful people have that same characteristic. They are mono-focused on what they're doing. And I think that's one component of grit, right? The other component of grit is saying, I never give up. Like, I am a fighter till the end. There will be no excuses for failure. And, to some extent, my competitivity comes out in this. And, the funny story, since I've been a child, wherever I go on a sidewalk, I can never be behind somebody. And it's not because they're smoking in Europe, right? It's because I have to beat them. I have to get to the crossing first. And I put all of that into grit. It's like, here's who I am. And I think I'm a fighter. And I think this is the formula, at least for me, that's been able to make me a successful person.
And do you feel that you're just as competitive with yourself as you are with other people?
Yeah, I would say that probably more, right? I mean, I'm very, very demanding of myself. My subconscious voice is constantly reminding me that, hey, you're not doing this, or why that. If on a weekend I laze around, there's almost guilt, right, around it a couple hours later. I do it anyway because you need this also. The older you get, the more you realize that you also need downtime from these things, because downtime refreshes you and mentally gets you back in the game. But I'm very demanding with myself. In fact, I never ask anything of anybody else that I would not myself be prepared to do. Now, that's a very high bar because, as I say, I live 24 hours a day for what I do, which means when I talk to other people, I'm like, hey, I'm willing to do it. If you really want to win here, you have to be able to do it. And sometimes we clash with entrepreneurs around this particular thing. But, the ones that have won big are the ones I think who have this characteristic. It's like demanding of themselves, demanding of their teams around them, right? And respect, so to speak, comes from that.
Do you think being overly competitive, I know it's definitely a winning characteristic of successful people, but at some point, can it be detriment to one's own ambition?
I think so. I mean, at the end, life is a balance, and I think, when I think about when I started this business 20 years ago, I'm a very different person today than what I was back then. And this is the benefit of perspective and the benefit of history. I'm a much better person, I think, today than I was then. I was not only mono-focused back then, but demanding and didn't accept any excuses from anybody. Today, I'm more likely to say I kind of understand that situation. Now, I may not be like that, but I'm not going to punish you either because of it. If it becomes repetitive, then it's a problem. But occasionally, yeah, that does create issues. But as we gain maturity, as we gain experience, we realize that balance above everything is what matters.
Yeah, absolutely. Sometimes it can be a bit of an illusion, the balance as well.
Yeah, I mean, I'll tell you that my balance comes also from my home. I get a lot of attention when I'm outside, and when I come home, I'm just dad or just Mark to my wife. And that brings me back to some sense of reality, because sometimes I go, how can you talk to me like that? That never happens outside, right? To my son or something. So that humility that you get at home, that stability that you get at home is so important to my own mindset. And when I think of my success professionally, it could not have happened without the bedrock of stability at home and the humility that requires, right, at home as well. So again, balance, a keyword.
So just looking back at your journey and your career, obviously there's a lot of curiosity, competitiveness, a lot of confidence in what you do. Can you walk us through your journey and how your passion developed for, investment and the business world?
Yeah, I mean, I have an atypical upbringing. I was born in Africa, and I spent my formative years there. So discovering cultures, for me, Africa was home. I remember going to the US for the first time and discovering America. So discovery's always been part of what I've liked. Different things have always been interesting to me, different people, different cultures. And when you put all of that in it, I think it's a starting point that allowed me to think about, wow, I think I have an open mind enough to be able to be somebody that could be good at investing. I spent a number of years working in companies, and then eventually said, I have to try this myself. Started my own firm. And we got very, very lucky early on in that we were the first investors in Skype. And that created a halo effect around us. So, the luck of the draw, so to speak, in finding Skype and investing and having the courage to go into the investment really came from our belief that different people can do different things. And that, I think, I attribute to my parents and also to my upbringing. Is when you live in all these funky countries, you realize that at the end, everybody's a bit the same. We all have the same preoccupations. And I think that commitment to this notion of diversity or things like that is so important to me. And that helps a lot when I look at ideas. We look at 2,000 ideas every year to make 5 or 10 investments. And when you do that, you have to have a lot of baggage to be able to kind of go through all of this, right? And that upbringing has helped me a lot.
What has enabled, or what does enable a company to go from good to great?
Yeah, I mean, a bit of luck, right? But at the end of it, I think in the tech world, at least, it's all related to the product itself. And we think of it as when there's no friction in the usage of the product, it has the opportunity to really go big and become a great company. And so that is certainly the attribute of Skype and Wix. If you want to build a website, there is no easier place than do it there. You come online. We've built products at Wix that allow an expert to build a website, but also somebody who's a novice who's never done it before. So the lack of friction makes it so important. And at the same time, the leadership of that company is fundamentally important, not only of the CEO, but of how the CEO has built people or created a team around him or her to be able to articulate the values that the company is trying to put out there, but the products. We keep coming back to product. That notion of lack of friction makes it so easy. And you can relate to that when you have apps on your phone. Sometimes you'll download an app and go, after a few days, you just never use it again. It's a little complicated, a little difficult. Whereas the ones that you use a lot, it's just like so obvious that it works. Even my mother can use them, right? So yeah. So lack of friction, I think, is what differentiates good from great.
What's the best piece of advice that you've ever received? personally or professionally?
Yeah, when I started working after university, I worked in a consulting firm, and my mentor, the man who became my mentor, over years, would repeat very often, tomorrow is another day. And at the beginning, I wasn't quite sure what he meant by that. But really, the way I've interpreted his meaning is, no matter how bad today might be, and we have many bad days, both personally and professionally, tomorrow the sun is going to come up and you have another opportunity to shine. And I've kind of taken that on as a professional, because it's true that in the venture capital community, we have a lot of failures. And we live as investors because we become friends with the founders of these businesses. And when they fail, it's both a personal failure, but also a friendship failure, because we feel sorry for them. But tomorrow is another day, right? And we keep repeating this. And it's what I tell all of our CEOs. Tomorrow is another day. And if you're well balanced, you have an opportunity to be successful there. So don't be depressive with what happens today. What happens today is history. What I care about is what happens tomorrow.
That's great advice, because I think one of the key skills that entrepreneur needs to learn is resilience. And
Yes.
there's so many high highs and there's so many low lows, and to be able to sort of pick yourself back up at the level where you can just sort of say, tomorrow's another day, it's another shot at this, and not get too bogged down in the lows, or again, not get too elated in the highs.
I think most people don't understand the entrepreneur journey. And that entrepreneur journey to the outside world looks like, I start a company and it just grows like crazy, and then I become very famous. And of course, some people may have had that journey, but for the most part, it's not a straight line. There's ups and downs, ups and downs. And when you're an entrepreneur, it is a bit of a lonely place, because you are the CEO of your company. And perhaps you have investors that you can lean on, but maybe you don't, right? And so at the end, you have to be strong mentally, because they will be down days for sure. And the question is how you react to those down days. And that simple advice that my mentor gave me helped me realize at the end that, what? Tomorrow is another day. I can wake up and win tomorrow, even if I lost today. Right? So that's always been part of how I think.
Yeah. And building on that, you mentioned before you had a mentor, or you probably still do. How important is mentoring and or coaching, to any entrepreneur? It doesn't really matter what stage of the journey they're in.
I think it is so critical, because as a young person, you don't know everything. Neither do I, by the way, right? But if I've lived 20 years more than you, I have the benefit of additional expertise and perspective. And so as a mentor, if you can share that perspective and that expertise with people, you can help shape their thinking. And I think as a recipient of the mentorship, when I grew up, I think that it helped shape not only my business acumen, but also my moralities, right? In terms of how I think about what is right and what is wrong. And when you see entrepreneurs that have succeeded but have never really had mentors, they lack some of these core skills of understanding what is right versus what is wrong, and that's, you only learn through very close mentorship with people. Now, you can make your own decision about what is right or is wrong, but you have to have a moral framework, I think, in which to operate. And we're living this right now. If you look at the whole freedom of speech in the US and the debate between Twitter, Facebook, and the US president, all of that, you see two different types of reactions. One is the CEO of Twitter has said, okay, I am going to do something about all this stuff. And the CEO of Facebook, who really hasn't done anything, in fact, he's decided he's going to kick the can down the road and not worry about this. My belief is one had mentorship in his life and the other one didn't, right? And the one who didn't is sitting there going, I don't know how to deal with these issues, or I don't want to deal with them. And I think that's where mentorship is so important. It gives you a framework to think, it helps you put things in perspective.
Learning from the people that have gone before, is obviously so important. Just going back to the investment world, and when we look at new ideas, obviously there's a lot of hype. It's hard sometimes to place a value on a company, and particularly, I guess, in more disruptive type of industries or type of products or services where there may not necessarily be sort of a baseline to measure it against. What does the process look like for, placing some sort of value on a company?
Very difficult, because all traditional methods of pricing don't work. And so at the end of the day, the market to some extent defines that, because if the company is hot, there's a lot of competition, and then it's a bidding process that happens. Now, we tend to invest much earlier than that happens. And so we benefit from it, taking a very early risk and hoping that we're going to be able to create some hype, and then be able to get investors interested. But in the internet particularly, hype is actually one of the currencies that a company creates. If you get millions of users using your product, take Skype, for instance, way back, right? We had millions of users who paid us nothing, right? And even at Wix today, we have 200 million users. Only 5 million users pay us anything. So, how do you figure that one out early on? And what you do is you come back to hype is a result of the greatness of the product. And people start talking about it and going, those companies are great, and the people running those businesses are good. The flip side of it is, hype has negative to it, because it's not very tangible often. And so one does have to be careful as one invests. But it is simply the pricing is, I'm concerned to use the word arbitrary, because there is no method, but there is some of that in the pricing of startups, yes.
Wow, that's really good insight. And another question that I had as well that I haven't been able to find an answer for is, when is a startup no longer classified as a startup? Do you have any personal insights on that, or is there some sort of baseline that you guys speak about in the investment world? What is the line for that?
Our line is, if you go public, you're no longer a startup. Right. And so given that our objective when we invest in startups is to either sell them or take them public, for us, it's an easy. You're no longer a startup if you go public or if you get sold. Those are the two criteria. Everything else along the journey just means you're a more maturing company. So if you think about Wix, 3,200 employees, right? We're not a startup anymore. But what we want to be is still have the startup culture within the company, because that's what allowed us to be successful. So the nuance is, the definition has a clear, before and after, but the culture you want to create and keep is one of startups, because there's nothing like becoming a stodgy, old, established company to give up being able to innovate, right? The last place you see innovation coming from is from established, stodgy old companies, because often we joke, but innovation kills your margins. And so large companies do not want to do it. Like, if you look around the world, most entrenched large companies, they just wait to be pushed into innovation by startups, because why would you innovate? Doesn't make sense.
So what are some of your recommendations or best practices that you've seen to actually still maintain that startup culture or the startup mentality throughout, and foster a culture of creativity and innovation?
Well, the number one thing that we have done historically is make sure that a lot of employees get a lot of stock options, right? It is so important from the beginning, and even still today at Wix, that many of our employees feel as if they're getting financially rewarded for the value that they're creating, right? And so one of the things we did not do well at Skype was be very generous with options. It was another time, it was 2003. But we corrected that and have been correcting it since. At Wix, we have 250 millionaires because we were very generous with options early on. That's, 1 out of 8 employees or 1 out of 10 employees. That's significant, right? And so I think the number one thing I encourage our entrepreneurs when we back them, one of the first questions that we ask is, what do you think about stock options? And if we get a sense that that person is, I'm not sure. So that's a major red flag for us, because that has become one of the bedrocks of our investment thesis. Stock options matter for people. At the end of the day, if you're going to work 6-7 days a week, 14 hours a day, you're going to sacrifice a lot. Yes, you should be paid, but then you should also participate in the upside. And we have seen it work. Whenever I go to Wix, I smile, because I know that all these people created so much value, not only for investors, but for themselves. And I think that's a tremendous journey to be part of. So if there was one thing, it would be that.
That's fantastic advice. And thinking about the entrepreneur lifestyle, obviously it can be quite isolating, and obviously one of the challenges is, getting the right people on your team, and also the buy-in as well, and stock options, as you're saying, is a great way to obviously get those employees to be part of your vision, be part of the company as well. Going back to the entrepreneurial realm, you refer to it as a lifestyle choice, but one of the biggest challenges is burnout. And as entrepreneurs, we're highly susceptible to hyper stress environments, mental health. So what are your thoughts or advice around that?
Yeah, everything you say is true. Burnout is a big problem. Stress is a big problem. Family life balance is a big problem. And so what I say to people is, the shoe has to fit the foot. You have to be mentally prepared to accept that these are going to be your challenges. Go into it knowing it's there, right? Don't go into it thinking it doesn't apply to you, right? Because if you think that, you simply are not going to have the tools to be very, very successful. So for us, that is so important, is the ability to recognize it up front. There is no cat in the bag, so to speak. I know what color that cat is, when I go into something, because I don't want to hope and guess that things are going to be different. So the advice I give is, it's okay, by the way, to work in a bank. It's okay to work in a company. It's okay to then say, hey, I have an aspiration to become an entrepreneur, but understand what it means. There's a price. It's not free, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think some of the times, people, in particular entrepreneurs, do go into roles, start businesses, and just sort of, I'll see where it goes and how it takes me. But obviously, actually really understanding what it actually takes from the outset, and sort of, setting yourself up for success is so important as well.
Yeah, look, there's a lot of people who would disagree with me, who say, no, but everybody can kind of figure it out themselves. And that's true. I mean, ice cream has many flavors, and it isn't a black or white scenario. However, the general guidance is always the same. It's, if you really want to be successful in a tech startup, right, as an entrepreneur, you have to recognize that you are not operating in a bubble. You're not trying to conquer New Zealand, right? You're trying to conquer the world. Yeah. And in doing so, if you're not willing to work 1,000 miles an hour, there is another person somewhere in the world who is, right? And this is what you have to recognize. It is a highly competitive world out there, that if you want to be successful with your idea, great entrepreneurs, if they put out a great idea and then say, I'm not willing to give up the lifestyle, somebody is going to see that idea and go, hey, that works. I could just work twice as hard as he or she does and be successful. So that's what you have to be careful about. Skype was started in Estonia. Wix was started in Israel, right? These are not countries where you say, oh, obviously it was in Silicon Valley. No, it was in places. We're seeing startups now started in Africa, in New Zealand, in Australia. I mean, the reality is the world has never been more flat in tech. And that's what you have to accept, is you are competing against 7 billion people to make your idea the biggest in the world. And that takes 1,000% commitment. Don't let anybody tell you otherwise, because it's simply not realistic.
Absolutely. Talking about Mangrove Capital now, obviously you're focused on the early stage investments, and you've got a philosophy built around, support and cheerleading. And when people typically think of, venture capital, it's just, purely sort of a financial investment, and some people try to avoid, investment where possible. What makes sort of Mangrove stand out, and what are the advantages beyond just the financial investment of VC firms and partnering with them?
Well, look, I mean, we were very fortunate. Very early on in our lives, we discovered Skype, and Skype became the company that formed our DNA, which is invest in crazy ideas, make a lot of money for your investors along the way. And that became formative for us in saying that the role you have to play is one of a partner, one of a cheerleader for entrepreneurs who are living themselves 1,000 miles an hour, and who sometimes need to turn to somebody and say, hey, I have a problem, or I have a concern, or I'm thinking about this. And so the notion from us, at least, of being a financial partner, yes, the money is one thing, But then there's obviously the support, the connections. We have 20 years of experience now. So we don't have all the best ideas, but probably if you're going to make a mistake, we've probably seen it before, right? And we can tell you, be careful about that one. And it's only advice we give you. We never expect people to listen to us 100% of the time. But if it's good advice, you should at least give us the benefit of listening. Now, venture capital is a flavor, right? Not all entrepreneurs should take money from venture capitalists. You have to be ready to have somebody else in the company. It's no longer just your company, right? You've let in shareholders, you've taken capital to grow your business. And I think that's smart. And at the end of the day, all decisions are no longer yours to be made. So it comes with a price and a responsibility to make sure you also treat your financial partners the right way. So I think venture capital is a fantastic way, but not all businesses are structured for it, right? You can want to build a smaller business and not need venture capital. In fact, I would tell anybody, if you don't have to take venture capital, don't take it. Because why would you get diluted if you don't have to get diluted? But you do need capital to start your business. And so up to you how you choose to get that capital. We happen to be one flavor of where you can turn.
Yeah, that's great advice. And looking now at the current situation with COVID-19, it's highlighted some gaps in our ability to respond to a crisis, both in the US and globally. What sort of lessons and opportunities have you seen come out of COVID?
Well, we've seen how fragile our economy is. And I've seen this through the lens of a number of my own companies whose businesses were doing great before COVID, and who from one day to the other, when the World Health Organization announced the pandemic, the business just died, right? So we've realized, oh man, no matter what you do with your business, it is super fragile and it could die tomorrow. That's an amazing lesson. Now, intuitively, we knew it, but you had to live it to really see it.
That's right.
The flip side of that same coin is there are some companies who have tremendously benefited from people being at home for 70 days, right? Whether it's entertainment businesses or medical companies. You know, you think about how many Netflix movies you may have watched, right? But there's so many businesses out there that ultimately said, oh, wow, look. And I think so what it's done is it's created an opportunity for things that might have taken many years to happen much faster. So I think of, for instance, telehealth, for instance, right? People were very concerned about talking to a doctor via video or even via an app or something like that. And I think we come out of COVID and people go, actually, that's not so bad. So there's going to be an acceleration of some of these trends that had really struggled to get off of the ground, and who now, being forced through the COVID process, go, actually, that's not bad at all. Our most important company right now in our portfolio is an app which is called K-Health, and what they want to do is replace your GP. And so you have a conversation with a robot, and the robot says, okay, this is how I'm diagnosing you, and this is how you should be treated. And the accuracy level is as good as a human doctor. Now, before COVID, people were like, I don't know, it's an app. My wife would say, I never use this thing. Post-COVID, my wife, who's my bellwether on all these things, goes, actually, it's not bad. If I don't have to drive to the doctor, sit in a room with a lot of sick people, but I can get good advice and ultimately get a prescription to buy my medicine, why would I not trust an app? So we're seeing consumer behavior change as well. And those are the two things, right? Business is frail in any business. And at the same time, opportunities are there and you have to jump on them when they are there. So in this case, K-Health, my sense is their future has been accelerated. What would have taken 5 years is now going to take 2. And that is a huge opportunity. And the benefit, by the way, for investors is being very diversified. We have about 25 to 30 companies in each one of our funds. And some are like the first example I gave, and some are more like K-Health. So at the end of the day, it's difficult to judge. But yeah, opportunities abound right now.
Definitely, in any type of crisis, there's the positives and there's also, the negatives, and it just brings out so much opportunity. And I think unless you get to this point, you obviously, sometimes wouldn't have been able to capitalize on and actually seen it as an opportunity.
Humans were creatures of habit. We don't like change. And so to the extent that we don't have to change, we would prefer that. And so, I've spent 20 years trying to understand why consumers would use a particular app or another. And beyond the concept of lack of friction, which I mentioned before, at the end, people only want to change if there's a significant benefit to them in changing. So if your healthcare is free, like in Europe, most of the healthcare is largely free. You just have to call up the doctor and go see it. But what's going to make you want to change that behavior? So it's got to be something that is so materially better than what you had. And because we don't like change, we just don't like change, which is, by the way, why my general prediction is we are going to come back to the old normal very quickly, right? To the very quickly.
Yeah, I agree. So looking now in a personal perspective, you invest on a personal level as well. You have a foundation. Do you take the same principles and practices from how you invest with Mangrove into your personal investments, or do you have a separate approach there?
No, first of all, I don't ever invest in tech personally because I do that professionally, and it's important to have separation. On a personal basis, I make investments also with entrepreneurs who are building other types of companies. And there, of course, I apply all the learnings that I have from my professional career. But no, I try not to mingle things. It's very important to keep separation so there's no conflicts of interest or anything like that with your own shareholders. But the key is still finding great entrepreneurs with good ideas that you're going to be able to fund and be able to give capital to and hopefully generate some form of a return.
And one other question, I know you have a lot of personal interests and things as well, soccer, cars, I believe as well. Just on a more of a general level for people, do you always think it's a good idea to professionalize passions, or should there be a point where passion should just stay a passion and not necessarily try to be a business venture out of it?
I think there's place for both. I think there's place to pick your battles with some passions you may want to turn into a profession. But then you have to approach it with grit, with 1,000% commitment, or you're going to fail. It's not about, I like tennis, so I want to be involved in tennis kind of part-time. That doesn't work. Nothing part-time works. So I think, in my case, I'm very passionate about soccer. And I know a lot of guys who run soccer teams, but I keep it purely a friendship thing because that's what I like. I very much enjoy going to see sports. I enjoy the camaraderie of it. I get a lot of lessons out of it from business. Cars are another thing. I like cars. I'm not passionate about cars, but I have a collection of cars because I like to drive them, and I think it's also a good investment case, right? So on my personal basis, I like to invest in things that I can touch, so to speak, more like brick and mortar things. I live so much in the virtual world professionally that sometimes, it's nice, particularly in this COVID crisis, when things really hit, I could walk into my garage and touch my cars. I'm like, okay, those are not going away, they're there. And no matter what happens around us, these cars are still going to be there. So I think everybody has to figure that out. But yeah, professionalizing passions, sometimes good, sometimes not good.
That's excellent. Well, thank you so much. Where can we find you, Mark? You've got a blog, occasional Twitter.
Yeah, so I'm on Twitter, and that's I share a lot of thoughts around that, and I have a blog called Dare to Dream Beyond. That blog is really designed mostly for me to articulate ideas, and I offer it to the public. But one of the things I have found is that taking the time to write. And I'm not a natural gifted writer, but so by forcing myself to write, it structures my thoughts and structures my ideas so that when I do have to do interviews or things like that, I have a path to how I want to express myself.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's very powerful. And to sort of have that as a resource base to, put your thoughts on, pen to paper or finger to keyboard for that matter. It's really interesting, even when I've had, journals and things like that, and to be able to look back and things that I'm going through now, and I've already thought about, and sort of processed a couple of years ago, just saves a lot of time. And, you sort of think, I know the answer to this because I've already dealt with that a couple of years ago or whatever the case may be. So I think it's a really powerful tool.
Yeah, it's one of the pieces of advice I give to many of our CEOs when they're struggling to make a decision is to say, write it down. Write your arguments, pro and con to it. Take the time, try it once. And when they do it, they go, you know what? It forced me to be focused, forced me to think about it, and I come out of it better. And I'm going to use this technique in some other situation.
Sure. Well, Mark, thank you so much for your time today. You've just had so much invaluable wisdom and insight. Thank you so much for sharing the experiences and things with us.
Well, thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure. And, anytime we can talk about passion and entrepreneurship and grit is something I find extremely rewarding, because all of those things together make the world ultimately a better place. And we do all of these things because we think that ultimately we're hoping to make this world better. And thank you for your series on grit, and reminding everybody that success is not free. It takes a lot of hard work and a lot of commitment. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Mark.